Yeah, you mentioned MicroStrategy as well. I wanted to get, I mean, you've made some great videos talking about MicroStrategy. I think MicroStrategy is a very interesting company. I mean, they're literally like they have their own money printer. They're selling their own equity for dollars and buying Bitcoin, buying this hard asset, raising their net asset value. What are some of the interesting things that you think, or what are some of the things you think are interesting about MicroStrategy?
So, first of all, just before we go into anything, I like to think that MicroStrategy is an investment and Bitcoin is a savings account. So, the difference between that is that you expect an investment to fluctuate or to change over time. Let's say, for example, with MicroStrategy, they're constantly changing their policies. For example, they said they're going to issue more shares. Um, they said that, oh, sorry, they have a CEO. They have a person who can actually change the rules, the things that the policies that they follow. So MicroStrategy is an investment because it changes because it's a business. On the other hand, Bitcoin is a savings tool because it doesn't change. So what I would recommend just right off the bat is you don't need to buy MicroStrategy if you don't want to. It's up to you if you want to do it at your own risk. But MicroStrategy could fail. MicroStrategy could go to zero at some point. There could be something that's happening in the background that maybe we don't even know about. So, just right off the bat, I want to tell you MicroStrategy should not be your only retirement plan. You need to have Bitcoin as well. So, I know a lot of people who have no Bitcoin and they just have MicroStrategy because they think they're going to outperform Bitcoin and they think it's guaranteed because it's happened in the past. But what if it doesn't happen in the future? So, that's something that I think people need to know, first of all. The second thing that they need to know is that MicroStrategy is basically just a way to accumulate as much Bitcoin as possible. And then this company is very likely going to use it as capital in the future. So let's say, for example, um, they may be able to use their Bitcoin to get fiat, to borrow fiat. And then they can lend that fiat at a spread. So let's say, for example, they borrow US dollars at 5%, and then they lend them to people who want US dollars at 8%. And maybe that's a good, I don't know if that's a great business plan for them. I'm just saying that this is possible. I'm not saying this is guaranteed. I don't know if this will happen, but that's just the possibility here. They can also become a Bitcoin bank where they start lending Bitcoin. But again, you have that risk where if your borrowers don't pay you back, then you could have to default on your obligation. So MicroStrategy could go bankrupt. So those are things that you need to consider. With that being said, I do think MicroStrategy is one of the best companies in the world. If you're trying to invest in something, if you're trying to invest in a different industry, if you're trying to instead of investing in yourself, like let's say instead of building your own business, instead of investing in your relationships, if you have some extra money, if you want to buy some MicroStrategy, go for it. I think it's a great company because of what they're doing. They're just accumulating as much Bitcoin as they can. They're borrowing as many dollars as they can to accumulate Bitcoin, and the dollars that they're borrowing are devaluing constantly. They're constantly being debased. So worst case scenario, MicroStrategy continues to accumulate Bitcoin. At some point, Bitcoin keeps rising in price. I'm a strong believer that Bitcoin's going to go much higher based on the conversation that we've had so far. I think Bitcoin's price is going to go much higher, and because of that, I think that MicroStrategy's asset value is going to go up. The potential for what they can do with their money is going to go up because they're going to have bigger and bigger savings to rely on. So they can do more things. They can hire the best talent. Maybe, for example, they could start a layer two. They could do a lot of risky things and they could completely change Bitcoin and they could potentially outperform Bitcoin for a very long time because of those risks that they're taking. But again, you have to look at the opposite side of it as well. MicroStrategy could go to zero. Their stock could drop significantly. Nobody can stop that from happening. If Michael Saylor turns out to be some bad actor who has all the keys and he takes all the Bitcoin, what are you going to do about it? You can't do anything about it. So I think that MicroStrategy is a great company to invest in. If you want to put a small amount of your portfolio into it, go for it. But the majority of your portfolio should be Bitcoin. If you have Bitcoin in cold storage, keep that Bitcoin in cold storage. Don't exchange it for MicroStrategy. If you're getting more cash flows, maybe put that cash flow into MicroStrategy. I wouldn't swap my Bitcoin for MicroStrategy. I don't see a reason for that. Even Michael Saylor, what he's doing right now, he's issuing shares to buy Bitcoin. What he's doing is he's selling overvalued shares, in his opinion, at least based on what he thinks. He's selling overvalued shares and he's buying Bitcoin with it. So what he's doing is he's selling his shares at a certain premium to the amount of Bitcoin that they hold. So that's called a net asset value premium. For example, at one point, the net asset value premium for MicroStrategy's stock was something like 3 times. So their shares were being sold by, or sorry, their shares were being sold for 3 times what they were backed by in terms of Bitcoin. So let's say they were backed by 1 Bitcoin, they were being sold for 3 Bitcoin. So what Michael Saylor was doing is he was issuing more shares and he was selling them on the market and he was buying more Bitcoin with it. So he was selling something worth 1 Bitcoin and he was buying back 3 Bitcoin with those proceeds. To me, that's genius. I don't know what anybody else has to say about that, but to me, that's genius because you're basically selling, he said it himself, you're selling $1 for $3. And then you're adding that value to the company. You're giving that value to your shareholders. A lot of people are angry that he keeps issuing more shares. To me, that's perfectly fine. I'm okay with him issuing more shares because he can execute his strategy much better if he has more capital. If he can sell more shares, accumulate more Bitcoin, he can easily become the biggest holder of Bitcoin in the world and nobody can compete. To me, that's a monopoly on its own. I think MicroStrategy has that massive monopoly. Nobody's going to be able to keep up. How do you value a company that holds 2.5% of the global money supply, of the global capital? You can't. It's impossible. So to me, MicroStrategy is massively undervalued because of the potential for Bitcoin. It may seem like it's overvalued because markets are valuing MicroStrategy based on the future potential of what the company can do. And we have no idea what that future potential is. To me, a 2x multiple is worth it because the company is being sold at 2 times the amount of Bitcoin that they hold. To me, that's worth it. I'm okay with it. Keep in mind, I don't have all my eggs in one basket. I still have that cold storage Bitcoin. So if MicroStrategy does go bankrupt, I can rely on that. To each their own, though. If you don't want to buy MicroStrategy, perfectly fine. If anybody in your audience doesn't want to buy MicroStrategy, perfectly fine. I don't see a problem with that. Just make sure that you have at least a little bit of Bitcoin.